So I thought, okay, let's stamp my feet a little bit and get connected to the earth. And then I thought, okay, well, my strength it comes from my voice. So I'm declaring that I want to be grounded. And then what did I do? I went and listened to one of my soundtracks that was for grounding in this Creative Success album. So I'm literally using my own product and my own strengths to overcome the challenges I have in the other aspects that don't come naturally to me. So then, even more than that, I got the idea of using stones, because I know that there are certain stones that are very grounding. And I couldn't remember exactly what all of them were, so I looked up what are some grounding stones. And one of the most grounding stones ever is hematite. So I grabbed my hematite, and I made a huge list, and I grabbed the stones like smoky quartz, celestial smoky quartz, or celestial quartz, and I think those were the three. There was also black tourmaline, but that one wasn't as strong as those other two. So I was like, okay, I know that holding a stone in your left hand allows you to receive more of that energy, because that's like the feminine side. And so I got out my yoga mat. I unrolled it enough to be able to sit on the floor. I held the hematite in my left hand, and I played this track in my headphones through my iPod. I know it's a little dated because it's an old iPod, but it works great. I listened to it's like 4 minutes, 35 seconds or so, this grounding audio while sitting on the ground with this hematite in my left hand. And at a certain point, I was like, oh, this feels kind of uncomfortable. So then I rolled up the mat partially, and I sat on the rolled end so that my spine and my hips were a little bit elevated to give me a little more relief. And I was like, oh, that feels a lot better. And then I went through this series of holding, noticing what was happening as I was listening to this audio. And at the beginning, it was quite uncomfortable. Like, it was hard for me to sit still, focus. I felt like this nervous buzz for a moment. And then at around 3 minutes, there was a complete shift into relief. My breathing came easier and deeper. I felt more stable in my body. And by the time it was finished, I felt so much more relaxed in my body. And I was grateful, and I was able to stretch, and I felt pretty good. So I thought, okay, that is extremely valuable. And then I was like, let's try it again. So I thought, okay, let me listen again. So I listened again, and the first few minutes, there was a little bit of like shaky, nervous shaking, like I was shedding something from my nervous system. And then I felt more mentally clear and focused. And I started thinking about how our vagus nerve is a little touchy right now. And also that our nervous system is kind of like our electrical system. And this grounding is almost like, helping us to stabilize that. And at about 3 minutes into the second listening, I felt slightly happy. And I could feel the weight of the stone in my palm. Like, I could feel it like literally grounding me. And I felt so much happier in myself. And in the last 30 seconds or so, I could feel my sacral, my root chakras, like the feeling of settling in, like settling down. And I was like, oh, that is cool. Then I was like, okay, let's take it a bit further. So I decided to take smoky quartz in my left hand to listen with the point facing out. The first minute or so, I felt a bit nervous, like it was almost like nervous stimulating. And I was like, ooh, this is really interesting, because our nervous system has to let go a bit in order to ground. Like, it's really hard to be grounded if there's stuff contributing to that nervousness. Around the second, I was feeling a little shaky, and around like 2 minutes and 30-ish seconds, where the sound actually shifts very drastically in a way, like you can literally feel it or hear it change. And after that, I could, like, my left palm felt warmer. And even though my right shoulder was a little bit uncomfortable, like I just felt in my body. And I just felt compelled to listen again. So I listened again, and I felt a little bit shaky at first. And then at the very end, I was like, okay, I feel pretty good. I felt my sacral, in a sense, kind of like drop, or I don't know, maybe it's release stuff and just drop into itself. And then I felt quite tired. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have a lesson in like 20 minutes. And even though I was tired, and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to get through this lesson? I haven't even planned it. Oops. In the end, that tiredness didn't last for very long. I set another intention that the lesson, like whatever lesson topic would come to me. And I actually ended up using the topic of the transit. And, the lesson went off without a hitch. I planned it really fast, and we had a really nice conversation. So my day completely changed from this idea of having a strategy for the discomfort instead of fighting it. I think that's the big thing. And interestingly enough, this gate 38, which is the gate that Mercury is in, is all about choosing the right fights, And I was like, gosh, that's so fascinating. And so today I listened to, I wanted to do some more experiments, because they were things that I already more or less knew. But I wanted a concrete experience that I had taken notes on, instead of it just being like a memory. So I grabbed, this time, the smoky celestial quartz in my left hand, and I decided instead of sitting, I would lay down. And sure enough, the beginning of this first listen, my left hand, interestingly enough, not my left hand. So I held the crystal in my left hand, but I felt energy moving like from my head, and then it like dropped into my sacral and root area to the end of that first listen. So I hadn't noticed any feeling in my head before, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Then the second listen, same crystal, felt a little nervy-jerky in my hands, and this time I felt my lower chest, my solar plexus, feel a bit warm, and it was pleasant. I felt a bit of gurgling in my stomach, and the most hilarious thing was, as soon as my stomach did that, or like right around the same time, there was like a tiny stomach gurgling that came from the audio, and I was like, oh, that's hilarious. And then I felt my sacral area at the end, that energy moving again. I was like, okay, let's keep going. More to the experiment. Then I listened with the same crystal with the volume muted. So there was no sound coming through, but it was playing. And I could feel my sacral warming up from the start. Some gurgling sounds, some jerky movements in my arms, just like similar to what I experienced when I was actually listening to it. Halfway through, I felt still warm, felt a little bit warmer. And what's really interesting is, even though it was muted, my iPod was getting warm or hot. Like, so it was working, right? It wasn't just because it was muted doesn't mean that the energy wasn't coming through. And the only reason I even thought about testing this is because I had somebody who had watched a reel of mine muted. And they're like, oh my gosh, I could feel the energy before I even heard it. And I thought, that is incredibly powerful. How cool. So then I was like, okay. I was starting to get all sorts of ideas while listening. Then the fourth and final time that I listened, I muted it again, and I could feel my left arm, in a sense, radiating energy. I could feel the heaviness of the crystal, just like when I had, or very similar to when I had experienced holding the hematite, but this was the celestial smoky quartz. And I felt the grounding of my hand a little bit. Around like a minute 42, I felt a tiny nervy feeling. And then I could feel the right side of my chest was warming. And then at about 2 minutes 49, I felt a little sleepy. And then 3 minutes 14 seconds, I felt a little bit nervy. And then at 4 minutes, I took a nice deep breath. And by the end, I felt really grounded, like sacrally. And in the root, after I finished listening at the very, very end, and I just had this desire to stretch and move a bit, and I felt really, really grounded in my body. Again, I felt this sense of gratitude, and I felt embodied. Like it was a sense of feeling heavy, but in a good way, like really grounded and embodied. So this was my experiment, or the creation that came from noticing discomfort, not giving into it, but moving through it in a very productive way, allowing that discomfort to bring me relief. And I think that's a huge part of my Gate 36 energy, is to transmute crisis, to move through emotional crisis, to feel all the feels, and to come out of it with learning, with power. So I just had to capture this, not just a moment, but this experience.